And we are live for another CEOism podcast with John J. Franklin. He is CEO at World Pro Ski Tour and Ski Racing Media, that is. This podcast brought to you by podbuyer.com, my agency if you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast like this one. John's quite the successful man. Well, to my eyes, at least, he's had a very long career in the sports world. He was president of Golden Gloves LLC for a while, Glory Sports International too. And yeah, he worked with a bunch of very influential and cool folks right there. So I'm really glad to have him on. He's got a wealth of experience and he's got the stories. So John, I'm really glad to have you on today. Almost like nervous doing this intro. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and about what you do nowadays?
So, Charles, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a complete pleasure to do this and to talk with you. We've talked a little bit in the past, and actually get on live is super exciting. And thank you.
My pleasure.
I started my career back in 1984 as basically a banner hanger for International Management Group, IMG, which is the big sports marketing behemoth that was acquired by Endeavor and then bought the UFC and all that. But back in 1984, we weren't quite as big as they are now. But I had read Jean-Claude Keely, who was a triple Olympic gold medalist, book called Comeback. And he talked about his agent, Mark McCormick. And I thought, boy, that's nothing cooler than to be an agent in the world of skiing. And so I learned about the company IMG, which Mark McCormick founded in the 60s, and chased them down and finally got a job there right out of school. But my job was hanging banners, and I wanted to be an executive. So I, tagged along with all the executives and finally snuck into some meetings and was able to sell some sponsorships and started developing a bit of a career at IMG. Ultimately, we sold sponsorships for the US ski team. We sold sponsorships for the Pro Tour. I became vice president of winter sports and worked in Olympic sports. And oddly enough, at the time, IMG was really just a country club sports company. Our divisions were golf and tennis and skiing. We didn't have any team sports at the time, and we certainly didn't have any combat sports. But every now and again, some boxer like Roberto Duran or Oscar De La Hoya would check in with IMG because they wanted to be on TV or they wanted some help marketing. And I would get the call because I think I was the only person in the company that even knew how they kept score in boxing. Because when I was growing up, I had lived in Detroit and my father was a boxing fan, and I rode my bike over to Kronk Boxing as a kid. And those sorts of things. I was a fan of the Golden Gloves and, got in the ring a few times with some of those guys as a kid. So I became sort of the boxing person at IMG, but we never really did anything. We occasionally tried to sell some sponsorships for some boxers and never really went anywhere. But after I left IMG, I got hired by a company called America Presents. So after 15 years at IMG and doing all kinds of stuff in the tennis, skiing, and I didn't really do much in golf, but in tennis and skiing worlds, I left to go to a company called America Presents, which had just signed David Reed, Olympic gold medalist, the only Olympic gold medalist boxer at the Atlanta Olympics in 1996. And we were managing his career, and we had a guy in our office, Dan Goosen, who was a boxing promoter who worked with a bunch of other boxers. And ultimately we signed to produce a contract to produce the Sunday night fights on Fox. And our chairman, Bill Daniels, then loaned Mike Tyson $10 million to pick up his promotional rights when Mike came out of jail. So we promoted all the Mike Tyson fights from Francis Botha, who was a kickboxer and boxer from South Africa, through Brian Nielsen. So that part of Mike's career, 5 fights. He fought Orlin Norris and he fought Andrew Galata in Detroit and a few others. But most of those fights were abroad because Mike was coming off of a suspension and a jail term. And, it was hard to get him licensed in the various jurisdictions. From there, Bill, our chairman, actually died in 2002, and I went off on my own and started my own company. I was about 42 at the time, and just it seemed like a really good time to, take off on my own. So I signed some marketing clients like Bet and Win, which ultimately became BWin, and started helping Bodie Miller with some of his contracts, another skier, and Julia Mancuso. And then I was working back with IMG. They hired me. They actually got into a boxing project, and I was still the only boxing person they knew. So the IMG London office hired me to help them with their contract with AIBA, producing the World Series of Boxing, which was a series created by the Olympic governing body of boxing, to try and bring professional fighters into the Olympics. So we're all aware now, back in the day, the Olympics was just amateurs, but we all saw Michael Jordan break through there and play in the Olympics, and Wayne Gretzky, skated in the Olympics. And the IOC had changed their tune to the effect that the eligibility control now filtered down to the governing bodies of the sport. So if the International Hockey Federation allowed pros, the IOC would accept them. They're like, you guys are in charge of your own eligibility. So boxing was looking at the same thing. Like, how do we let Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield and Oscar De La Hoya, Manny Pacquiao fight in the Olympics? They've all won all this money and they've got all their accolades and their belts, but none of them, very few of them have an Olympic gold medal. So some of them had won obviously as amateurs, but not as pros. So that fight is actually still going on today. This is 20 years ago, but I just read something, I think yesterday, that Manny Pacquiao was trying to get his eligibility to go back and fight in the Olympics. But anyway, the World Series of Boxing was like a hybrid pro amateur league, and IMG was charged with activating that for what was called AIBA at the time, the governing body of boxing. And they hired me to do that. So under my own company, we produced multiple series, 30, 40 events on the television and some of the activation for IMG AIBA. Ultimately, IMG got out of that business, and I stayed on working for AIBA and became the London boxing supervisor for the London Olympics in 2012. And then I was set to actually do that same role in Rio in 2016. But one of my other clients became Glory Kickboxing, and Glory at the time was trying to position themselves as the next UFC. Kickboxing had been around, like K1 kickboxing and some of these other leagues, but Glory was sort of the phoenix that rose out of all those ashes. And their goal was to be the next UFC, but with kickboxing. And the theory behind that was, hey, when the short story actually is, when you watch a kickboxing match, people are punching and kicking. When you watch a UFC match, that's when everyone cheers. And then when the fighters go down to the ground, everyone boos. So kickboxing is really just the stand-up fighting. So Glory had a big initiative to try and become the next UFC. I produced a couple of their fights in America. They were based out of Singapore and Holland, which are really big kickboxing markets, but they wanted to be successful in America. And they hired me as their global CEO, and I ran that league, kind of driving it from big losses to, ultimately breaking even. And then they went a different direction and hired a guy from the UFC to run it. And I moved on to do some other things at that time. But one of the other things I did was go back to my roots. So I started this story with selling sponsorships for the Pro Tour and reading Jean-Claude Keely's book about Mark McCormick, his agent, and the Pro Ski Tour. Well, ultimately came back, towards the end of my career, and became CEO of the Pro Ski Tour and of Ski Racing Media. The Pro Ski Tour is the dual head-to-head style racing where racers run it like a tennis tournament. You race side by side. If you beat the other guy, you advance to the next round. So it's a little, in our mind, more exciting than the old style Olympic and FIS racing, because you can actually see who wins the race. Like if you watch an Olympic ski race, nobody knows who won unless you look at the times on the clock. But in our style racing, it's head to head. Whoever wins goes on to the next round, and you can see them cross the finish line simultaneously. So we have great photo finishes, and your stars go up and ski again. If you watch the Olympics, they get one run or two runs, and then they go home. In our system, if you win, you advance to the next round and you race again. So For example, one of our racers is double Olympic gold medalist Ted Ligety, and you get to see him multiple times, throughout the day, throughout the tournament. So you get to watch your favorite racers more than just once. So we like the format, and we're getting more and more traction. We've got great sponsors like Celsius Beverage and Mazda Cars and Seiko Watches. So we're getting good traction in the marketplace in the sports marketing world. And the other product that we run out of the business is Ski Racing Media. It is historically the number one Bible of the sport, been covering ski racing since the 1960s. And we cover ski racing, not just the Pro Tour, but the World Cup and the Olympics and NORAMs, which is the North American Trophy Series, and Europa Cups. And we're really the only publication or digital publication now covering all that stuff. So we are out there, race to race, and really provide the niche skiing fan with everything they need to know that's going on in the world of alpine ski racing. So there you go. 5 minutes, nutshell, my career. I'm sure I missed a lot of it because I can't remember stuff so well anymore, but there you go.
We'll try to bring out the stories. Let's start with Iron Mike. I read his book. It was so painful because the guy's so tortured. Thank God nowadays he's doing better apparently. But yeah, just loaning him $10 million is quite funny, because
well,
it's not like 1 million, it's like
Mike,
10.
Mike and his team 3 times in my career, really. So when I was at America Presents, we did those fights, and he was, sort of at the end of his career and trying to get, some of the things you just mentioned, mentally straightened out. He was starting to work on his Undisputed Truth show. And he went on to do, I think, 2 or 3 fights after that, after we were done with Lennox Lewis, and then a couple, he lost a couple with some guys I really never heard of. But ultimately, he started a promotional company with a guy from Canada. I'm trying to remember the guy's name, but it was called Iron Mike Productions. And they did a bunch of pro fights. They were signing fighters. They were competition for like Oscar De La Hoya's company and all that. And Mike was, sort of headed the way with promoter in partnership with this business guy. And they did 1 or 2 fights. And the TV production, I don't know what went wrong because I wasn't there, but ultimately Mike's brother-in-law, Azim Spicer, and the business group reached out to me, and I helped them on their next 5 fights producing the TV. So we became the TV production company for Iron Mike Productions. And we brought Mike to Houston, and where else?
And how big are these deals, just for this, so that the audience know, how much do you bank when you do that?
Well, it depends on what the deal is. Television deals run the gambit from you buying time on TV, with the TV networks being brokers of time and selling it to you, to getting multi-million-dollar rights fees. So, every fight, every television deal is a separate negotiation. Formula One went from basically, paying to be on TV in America to a barter deal with ESPN to getting millions of dollars in rights fees. And it's based on the success of the programming. So if you're fighting some guys that Mike just found or just signed from USA Boxing, you might be paying to be on TV. But if you're, doing, Tyson versus Lewis, then, somebody's going to make you a big guarantee, or you're going to do it, via pay-per-view. At Glory, we ran the gambit because we had contender series fights with fighters nobody ever heard of. And we had tournaments that were, head to head, where guys would fight 3 times in one night. And then we had big pay-per-views, collision events, we called them, that were guys like Rico Verhoeven and Badr Hari. And the economics are, vastly different between a fight in Rotterdam that sells 15,000 tickets and is on pay-per-view, and you're selling international rights all over the world to different networks, and then filling in the areas that you don't have a national television deal with like an internet pay-per-view. And we were innovators in that. We were one of the first groups to work with, at the time it was called UFC.tv, and it was a streaming, pay-per-view service. It was new. Ultimately that morphed into UFC Fight Pass, which is the existing product now. But Glory at the time, we worked very closely with the UFC, and we were the only non-MMA product on UFC Fight Pass. And to me, as CEO, that branding was just super important because it lifted us to the level of the UFC. And I think that, that still carries on today. The promotions like LFA and Cage Fury and others that are on UFC Fight Pass really helps them to get that UFC branding in all their promotions. So they become like feeder series to the UFC, and the fighters, get some of that UFC branding. Some of these up and coming fighters can do that. But we did the same at Glory. We were trying to, hitch our star onto their star. But we were still at that time building in the US, but pretty strong in Europe. We're doing big arenas in Europe. Again, at that time, MMA was not allowed in France. So our events were really big events in France. We had some French stars and all that. So to answer your question, long answer, money can go from, 0 to 100 miles an hour when it comes to TV rights for sports. On the ski tour right now, we pay our own production, but we're able to do barter deals and deliver commercials to our sponsors, provide a really good product for the networks to network standards to be on CBS or, NBC Sports or some of the other networks we're on, but we don't get a ton of money. It's not a big revenue source for us.
Right.
Our major revenue source is some of the companies that I mentioned a minute ago are our partners and sponsors who, get to demonstrate their products in vignettes in our shows and get to be aligned with the ski racers and, our marketing through social media, via our tour. So
Right.
that's our revenue source more than rights fees for television.
So let me try to take a stab at that with the Iron Mike deal. So 5 years, 5 fights or something like that. Some of them you actually pay the network to be on.
No, with Mike, you don't pay, at the time you didn't pay the network. We were with Showtime and we got paid. Some were pay-per-view and some were just big Showtime fights.
Okay.
When you've got Mike Tyson, coming out of prison and all that, of course, you're selling a lot of tickets and you're getting money in rights fees and, sponsorships in combat sports at that time were a lot harder to come by. But now that IMG has bought the UFC, the whole game has changed. But companies didn't want to be associated with combat sports because of the violence and the blood and all that. But that era is way behind us. If you look what IMG has done with the ring mat at the UFC, I mean, they have 3 or 4 different products in the same category. They'll have Prime outside and they'll have Monster on the ring and they'll have body armor in the concourse. And there was a time when, and certainly for sports like I'm working in right now, you're pretty much category exclusive. If you sign an energy drink like Celsius, we have Celsius, we can't go ahead and do a deal with, another energy drink company. We are exclusive to Celsius, but the UFC is such a strong property that they're able to carve out, and sponsors want to be with them so badly that they're able to carve out, niches, little areas for particular sports sponsors.
Right. So one Mike fight, let's say that the cost is around 5 million and the revenue is around 25. So 20 million.
Well, that
profit.
would be amazing if that was the case.
Yeah.
It just depends on how many tickets you sell and what your deal with, at the time Showtime was. He was exclusive to Showtime in those days. But they pay you a guarantee and they either put it on, pay-per-view where you get a percentage of that.
Okay.
And ticket sales, as the promoter, you get the ticket sales. So, the math is not that secret. If you get, sell 10,000 seats at $100 a piece, you've got, a couple million bucks. And, but the real money obviously is in the pay-per-view. When you listen to the numbers, you read the stories of, a $90 pay-per-view that sells 1 million pay-per-views, then you've got $90 million to work with that evening, plus the, sponsorship, plus the ticket sales. On the other hand, the old school math was the pay-per-view companies and the cable operators and all that, they're taking, pretty big percentage between 30 and 45% that comes right off the top. Then, the athletes get a big guarantee, and it's not just Mike, it's whoever he's fighting, plus a couple of fighters on the undercard and all that. And then you have all the affiliated and associated costs of marketing it globally. So you're buying ads in USA Today that are $100,000 a piece, and you're doing a couple of tours to promote the fight to a couple of cities with the athletes, and that costs a couple $100,000. And at the end of the day, it can be good if you sell a lot of pay-per-views, or you can lose a lot of money because you've got money invested. When we started, before I was CEO of Glory, they tried a couple of pay-per-views in the US, and they did not go that well, and they were big revenue losses. And if you look at Bellator, which is a secondary league to UFC, they've done one or two pay-per-views, and their sales have been they claim 20 to 40,000, and even a bad UFC pay-per-view does 100 to 200,000. The goal obviously is to get more towards 1 million. So you don't know what you're going to get. It's a big risk. Everybody wants to be a fight promoter, but there are significant barriers to entry. You have to be able to rent a big arena. You have to be able to do a pay-per-view deal. You have to be able to sign the fighters. The fighters are often signed exclusively with a promotion. You just saw what Francis Ngannou went through to sort of move on from UFC and cut a deal with PFL, that guarantees him a lot of money. And I just read the PFL revenue. Released revenue. They just did $100 million investment from a Saudi, wealth fund. And in the articles about it, it's all public information. They claim their revenue in 2022 was only $10 million. So which makes sense because you look at where they fight and how many tickets they sell and all that. So they claim that year they lost $46 million. So they've raised a lot of money from investors. They just raised another 100 million from the Saudi wealth fund, but they're going to burn through that so quickly, because they're as part of their deal with Francis, in addition to giving him a huge guarantee, they're starting a division in Africa, and now with this money, they're starting a division in the Middle East, and they've talked about a development series in Europe. And if you look at the, sort of the model is that this Asian promotion called One Championships, which, claims to be bigger than the UFC, they're still losing money, and they've been at it for years, and they're looking at venture capital. And, if you rent out a big building in Japan or Singapore, and you only sell a couple thousand seats, and you're paying your athletes and you're paying your staff, and you're producing the television with the big screens and the pyrotechnics and all the cameras and the production companies and running the TV trucks and all that, your shows can cost you, $1 million and more. And then your revenue is half that. And you do that 10 times and it starts looking pretty skinny.
The margins are so thin. I didn't thought it would be that way. So it's like 10% margins when everything's stabilized.
Yeah, it depends on, again, if you're selling 1 million pay-per-views, you can make $30 million if you're and do that 10 times, and you've got a real company. And plus your sponsorship, like events, again, it's pretty simple. You've got 3 revenue sources for events. You've got, television content, 1, you've got sponsorship, 2, and you got ticket sales, 3, and then maybe a little bit of merchandising, 3.2. So our chairman at IMG, Mark McCormick, the founder, he always said, we don't want to be in a sport unless at least 2 out of the 3 of those are very strong. So if you look at a sporting event like the US Open of tennis, which is going on right now, they sell a ton of tickets. They move 300,000, 400,000 people through that complex over the course of the week. Their TV rights are really strong. It's the US Open. They're getting big guarantees from the television networks, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And of course, with strong television and strong, participation, then you have something that's of value to sponsors because the exposure is, global. So you've got 3 strong revenue sources and a extremely profitable event. Contrast that to what I'm doing in skiing right now, where you don't sell any tickets. You might sell a few VIP passes or something like that for your hospitality. The television is, hopefully just a break even, or maybe it costs you money to be on TV. And then, you've got sponsorship because people like being involved with skiing, and you've got a good television package. They get their commercials on TV and all that. So you really only got one significant revenue source, and that makes it very difficult to take the thing to profitability. It can be done because you can come up with title sponsor and a presenting sponsor and a bunch of official products, and work really hard to keep your costs down and be able to deliver good opportunities and prize money to the racers. But it's a much tougher road when you don't have ticket sales. And then if you balance out, like at Glory, 30% of our revenue was ticket sales. If you talk to people in the UFC marketing department, they claim they're at like 10% of revenue is ticket sales, because their sponsorship is much higher and their television rights are much higher. So when COVID hit, to digress, COVID hit, UFC could move into their Apex Center and do events without selling tickets. And it was only like a, 10-15% hit on the revenue. For Glory, if we did shows like that, it would have been a 30% hit for us, because, we had a higher percentage of our revenue on ticket sales.
Okay. How can we make a boatload of money? Because it's so surprising, because the sport is so exciting. Let's call it the UFC, for example. I still check the fights. It seems like it's a gold mine, and we're not like fully taking the money there. Like how can we take advantage of that? Would it be signing split deals with athletes, share the pot? Would it be to not rent an arena?
Really smart people have, tried to emulate the UFC model,
right?
Trolling the fighters and, signing them exclusively to their promotion, so you don't lose them when they become big. And, great sponsorship sales, good ticket revenue, pay-per-views every 6 weeks, matching up good guys. It's been Dana White's been obviously a miracle man when it comes to matchmaking and building personalities. They're a machine. They know how to do that. But if you look at what the PFL has done, you look at, some of the smaller promotions, Bellator, it's tough. I mean, Bellator has built-in TV revenue because they were owned by, or still owned by, Paramount, which was Spike Television. We got rights fees at Glory to be on Spike TV, and we worked with Bellator very closely. We did some co-promotions with them to try and build our brand through, some of their MMA products. So, it's hard. You gotta have so many things fall into place properly to be able to do that. And there's a lot of leagues and trying, like I mentioned, One Championships, PFL, everybody's got their little angle on what it's going to take to be the next UFC. In the meantime, UFC keeps chugging along and doing what they do best. And I think their merger with IMG 5 years ago or 6 years ago, whenever that was brilliant, because you took the best sports marketing guys in the world and combined them with the best combat league in the world, and made for a very successful business.
Yeah. Okay. Superstar fights, Logan Paul and Jake Paul and so forth, influencer fights. I think that could be an angle. What about giving, profit sharing would be smart, but what about giving them literally shares of the company?
Well, I think a lot of those guys, are their own promoters. If you look, I don't know exactly the business relationship with some of those guys, and, Triller and these other fight promotions that have done these things. But, they have their own promotional companies, and they work with, their opponent's promotional company. And those fights are one-offs, though. They're not leagues. Like we're talking a little bit different of a business model, where you find, two celebrities or two guys and pit them against each other, more like the Mayweather-McGregor fight.
Yeah.
They're one-off spectacles. And we looked at some of that with Glory, and we decided we wanted to be, the actual league that had the best fighters, that gave out the best belts, and not pitting, Goldberg against Del Rio or something. Find some guys from the WWE with a big following and have them kickbox each other. So, and Bellator does a little bit of that. They've brought in some, celebrity fighters over the years, but, our goal at the time was to be a legitimate kickboxing league, not just do spectacle fights. But this, that's like a different, and to show you it's a little bit different, the Saudis are doing a big one of those coming up. I think it's a couple of celebrities, but in any event, I was talking to their boxing guy over there, and it fell into the entertainment division of their organization. It didn't fall into the sports division. It was more like the guys who are doing, bringing the big concerts to Saudi Arabia organized. And maybe it's the Tyson Fury Francis Ngannou fight, but they're treating it like a entertainment spectacular, like one-off, not a combat sports league that they're doing. So, but the model is the same, obviously, for the one-off. You're trying to sell pay-per-views, you're trying to sell sponsorship, and ultimately you're trying to sell tickets and corporate entertainment. So
I'd have them fight like me, that I'm a virtual guy, wouldn't fight in an arena. That is one. Then for the media, I'd ask them to do a Facebook Live and a YouTube Live on all of their channels, both of them, so that I wouldn't get like problem with the media. And then I'd include the fans massively. So I think there can be huge money to be made in the betting field, right? Like, and you can back your athlete.
That's really your fourth revenue source now, be in line with betting. But with those guys, it's step by step by step. For example, at Glory, we didn't have a betting sponsor because nobody was making odds on our fights. So ultimately, you have to get in the game with an odds maker. Obviously the biggest fights have that, but if you're a smaller league, if you're LFA, or if you're starting out, or if you've got fighters nobody heard of, they're all wild cards and unknown quantities. So nobody is making odds on those fights. So if you're looking at our ski league, there's no odds makers making odds on our races. So we would have to employ the odds makers. They'd have to get up to speed on who the racers are and all that. And then you can get, that fourth revenue source of gambling. Obviously with the UFC and the big boxing matches, there's a whole bunch of different people and betting companies making the odds and different ways to bet on them all. And it's, as has become legalized over the years. When I was working with Bet and Win in the early 2000s, all the gambling, all the sports books were offshore. And actually our owner came in to Washington to visit, whatever the US, whatever we were doing over here. He actually got arrested because he was running an offshore sports book. Ultimately, he got out and went home to Austria, where he was from. But and they then came to me and they said, we think it's too much of a risk for you to help us with marketing because, we're running an offshore sports book that's not legal in the US. And I said, well, I'm not running the sports book. I'm buying advertising. I don't think I'm really at risk putting logos on fights and banners and stuff like that. So if you remember in the early days, the mid 2000s, there were a lot of, casino royales and all that, even fighters like put henna tattoos on their backs with, I think it was Palace, some sports book, but ultimately that kind of phased out. And then the states started legalizing gambling. So now, Bet Online and all those guys are all, fair game to advertise on your fights and in your leagues.
Two ideas here. So my brain's like, how can we make the product more immersive, right? We've seen Apple Vision Pro, and if the skier goes downhill, what if we can like see everything that goes through his eyes, also the sounds, also his heartbeat, his cortisol levels? That'd be cool. And then the second part is, can we do a Drive to Survive type of series to really get into the athlete's life and the preparation and what led to that?
All the leagues do that now, and we're on our 5th season of our Drive to Survive series. So we call it Life in Between Gates. And what it does is we've had a couple different producers over the years with a little bit different vision of Life in Between Gates. But basically, it's a docu-series from each race that tells the stories, like how does a journeyman racer who's driving in his van and sleeping on the side of the road end up in the starting gate next to Ted Ligety, who's won 2 Olympic gold medals and flew there on his sponsor's private jet. So what are the different journeys of the racers and, how they're treating the race and how they're interacting with one another, and tell the stories that, how they got there, basically. And this past year, our guy who's in charge of production picked out like 4 racers each race and focused on them, whether they won or whether they lost, or if they got beat in the first round, like what happened and why they crashed, and where did they catch that, all the preparation that went in to try and win some of the $250,000 prize money that weekend. And you walk away with $500 because you lost in the first round. And certain guys, or women too, because we do women same courses, equal prize money, how disappointed were they to get there and go nowhere? We had a series similar to that in Glory that we called After the Fight. And we would follow the fighter, not leading into the fight, but after the fight, whether they won or lost. And they go home and they're beat up and they're questioning their, career choices. And boy, what's next for me now? I lost this big fight. What's going on? And we tried to, keep it interesting and tell the real stories, the real life stories of that fighter or that racer. So when I joined the World Pro Ski Tour 5 years ago, that was the first product that we created that was new, was Life in Between Gates, because we were trying to, follow the success of Drive to Survive. And we don't have the big budgets like they do. And, ours is a little more gritty. When we try to tell the stories only in the words of the people in the system. So we didn't have a narrator. We didn't have a host saying, "Hey, what do you think?" It was all like interviewing me at the start of the show. And I'd say, "Yeah, we're here in Howson Hill and we're talking, the race course is hard. And this is the oldest operating skier in America. And we're expecting Ted Ligety to do really well here." And then they go to our course setter. "Well, I'm setting this course wider because the hill is steeper and we need to slow the racers down coming around the corner." And then you go to the racers and they're like, "Well, this is a little different than last week because last week it was super icy, but we've had 2 feet of powder here and this is what's going on. And Nolan Casper couldn't get here because they closed the pass. So he's going to come in the morning. He's going to have no time to prep." And then we'd get to Nolan in the morning. "Well, Michael thinks that you're really at a disadvantage because you weren't here yesterday because they closed the pass." And he's like, "No, this is a great hill for me. And, I raced here as a junior and whatever." So the story was really told in the voices of the competitors and the people in and around the race circuit. And that was the idea of Life in Between Gates. And it continues on. We're in like I said, our 5th season of it right now.
Love it. I just added it to my watch list. Gonna
You can see it. You can see
watch that and eat
yeah.
some
So
food.
that goes out on the NBC Sports Network, regional networks, AT&T Sports, Amazon Prime. All our
Love it.
episodes are on Amazon.
Pretty cool. I didn't know you guys were on Amazon.
Yeah.
This is nice. I'm gonna watch it and tell you what I think about it.
Hey, we need all the help we can get. So any ideas that you can improve it without
Drive to
spending a
Survive
ton of
was
money.
pretty good. So let's see. What I liked about Drive to Survive, the quality of production and how they interviewed the athletes as well. That was super cool, super fun. And obviously F1 is really flashy, right? It's like cars. I want to ask you, because we've got 15 minutes left, how much money can a CEO of a sports company do on a yearly basis? And is it pure big cash, or you also get stocks?
Well, it depends on the league and it depends on the sport. Obviously, again, it's like TV rights. It's 0 to multiple millions. Dana White controlled part of UFC at a percentage there, and they sold for $4 billion, and he made $400 million. So he became a multiple hundred millionaire. Other leagues, guys like me are just duking it out, trying to get the league to survive. And I'm an investor in this league, and I put money into it. And I'm the first guy that doesn't get paid when our cash flow is tight. So it's just like any other entrepreneurial venture. You can be making a share of the profits. You can be getting a salary. You can be, putting money into it as the owner of the league. So there's no like definitive answer. If you look at the president of the USTA, which is a nonprofit, I'm sure it says what his salary is, and I don't know. I've never really looked, but I would guess it's $1 million or something close, or a little more. So it depends on the league. Somebody who is managing a global sporting league that is, has billion in revenue, you're going to get paid accordingly. If you're running a small Friday night fight promotion in New York, you might be making profits or not profits. It's so across the board. There's not even a
And passion
metrics
needs to be the base, I guess, is the point here. So you must have had quite a lot of fun doing that in the last 3
Well,
decades of your life.
everybody's definition of fun is different. So, I still like to travel. I still get excited to get on a plane. I've been all over the world. I've worked at, every Olympics since Calgary in 1988. And so, I travel a lot. And when I'm going on vacation, I travel more. So for some reason, it's still exciting to me, for me to get on a plane and go somewhere, because you don't know what's going to happen next. And I've always, told my children and people I do business with is, you have to go. If you don't go, nothing happens. It's almost like the Michael Jordan, you lose 100% of the shots or whatever he says that you don't take. You don't score if you don't take the shot. So, my career has always been let's go to the Olympics. Something's going to happen. Let's go to the fight. You're not going to. Nothing will happen if you don't go. That's for sure. So, and I still like it. I mean, so I haven't lost any of my motivation when it comes to stuff like that. Like my vacation this summer was going to Rome, Croatia, and Paris with 4 kids under 12. So,
challenging.
And it was, it was fun all the way. Like every moment, of wonder that a kid sees when he sees Pompeii or Mount Vesuvius is, that's the reward when you see the wonder in your kid's eyes at seeing something new or going to a new place or the fun jumping off the front of the boat or whatever. So, that stuff doesn't happen if you stay home and you're on your iPad.
Gotta take risks. Gotta put it all out there. Wanna ask you, because you're an athlete yourself, you work with also super athletes. You've lived a life. What stories have you got and insights from working with these top athletes, whether it's from mindset, whether it is on how they manage themselves right before a fight, right before an event? Any insightful stories for CEOs?
Well, I think, every one of them manages it differently. Some of them, get really into their head and they're pounding on their skis or on that bag. And it's like, come on, let's go. And other ones are like calm and Zen-like and in the starting gate. And then the thing starts and they explode into action. But, I think anyone who reaches that level in any sport is super mentally tough. And everything has to be working for them. It is unique for an athlete not to be in, prime physical condition. They have to be strong. They have to be quick. They have to be mentally alert. And that stuff, starts deteriorating, obviously, as you age. But, that thing that you could do at 22 is harder to do at 32, but you might have more experience and be able to okay, I can cut this gate shorter. I know when a guy's got his hand back, I'm going to move away. And so experience counts for a lot too. But, at the top level of the game, you have to have everything working for you. Your equipment has to be perfect. Your preparation has to be perfect. Your weight has to be perfect, because everybody else is that way. All the top athletes are all great athletes. So then it comes down to your preparation and your mental edge and your grit and your determination, not to go down or to, just go one degree harder than the next person, and, us mere mortals don't have that. We can get in as a great shape as we want, but unless you've got all those factors merging together to get you to become best in the world, you have to, and you have to be obsessed, you have to be obsessed to go for perfection. For sure. When you look at the best athletes in the world, it's just a different level of strength and quickness that us mere mortals have.
And the sports you've been to, I mean, in skiing, just like one little miscalculation can lead to you being a snowball down the hill and having your limbs distort distorted in all kinds of wrong
I break
directions.
sports out into like those super high intensity sports like skiing or water skiing, where you literally can't make a mistake because nobody else is. And you have, 1 minute or 30 seconds to prove that. Contrast that to a sport like tennis or baseball, where you can lose a set, you can lose 2 sets, you can still win the match in advance. So you can go, your whole competition can go off the rails for an hour, and you can lose 2 sets, 6-0, 6-0, but then get it together and win the next 3 sets. So you can make a ton of mistakes in a tennis match and still win the match. You can, in a baseball game or football game, you guys can have a bad quarter where everything's going wrong and you can still win the game. But like in skiing, you don't have that opportunity. You make one mistake, you're out. So you have to be almost perfect all the time in order to achieve victory. So when you think about sports, think about, how many mistakes can you actually make and still win? Boxing, I guess, is sort of in the middle, but if you take one punch the wrong way, you're out.
From Mike.
But, you can still have a bad round. You can lose 5 rounds and still knock the guy out. Everybody's got at that level has a puncher's chance. But, if you look at sports, there's definitely different levels of where you fit in intensity wise.
Right. In boxing and UFC, it's like, just one punch or one kick to the head, because there's not much control on having your lights out. There's probably trainings that are coming from that and like taking a bunch of punches. But I mean, it just takes one and your lights are out.
The referee says at the start of every fight, protect yourself. That's look at, the classic fights, Muhammad Ali versus, George Foreman in the jungle, where Ali just played rope-a-dope for 10 rounds or whatever and let the guy punch himself out and then knocked him out. Basically no offense for 10 rounds. So that's not the strategy like a normal human would take, but that was what he needed and understood what he needed to do to win. So you got to have the mental game, you got to be smart, you got to be strong, you got to be quick, you got to be well trained. Everything has to be in place to become the best in the world. That's for sure. There are no shortcuts.
I'm watching the Ali and Foreman fight. Ali's in the white trunks, right?
Yeah, I think so. I haven't looked at it in a long time.
Weird fighting techniques from the 80s, like so different from nowadays. But yeah, he was such a great dancer, a great footsteps, and
well, he's inspired the Rocky movie. Like, come on, come to
Wow.
Great era.
Yeah. And what do you have to say about like new fighters and, like Sean O'Malley, that's promoting himself quite well? Do you think there's a future in which like these athletes will start their own leagues because they've got the media, right? They've got the following, they've got the wildness.
Yeah. I mean, that's always been the case. Ali was super smart with his career. When George Foreman came back after, being retired and being a preacher for a while, he managed himself, and you get the experience. You're no longer, a babe in the woods, so to speak, and you understand how to do it. So, I just mentioned the Rocky movie, kind of in passing, but if you look at the Rocky character and you look at the Apollo Creed character who's trying to manage his own career and served as his own promoter and all that. So, fighters have done that and will continue to do that. And, the boxing world doesn't have the leagues like, UFC or Glory or Bellator or LFA. Those are all leagues. And the boxing is more of a mishmash of one-off fights and try and make the next fight. And if you win this one, you got to go, up against that guy who, certain promoters control. It's more of a, you got 4 different, governing bodies that are sort of these amateur governing bodies that are trying to force, belt fights on guys who don't want to take them. And now, with the internet and, pay-per-view globally, which didn't exist 10 years ago, Nagano can fight Tyson Fury in Saudi Arabia, and, it's all separate. It's not, it's more of a mishmash. You had Mayweather fight McGregor, even though McGregor was with the UFC, and Mayweather has his own promotional company, and it's more of a mishmash out there right now for sure.
Do you think athletes in the fighting worlds, UFC and boxing, do you think they can have a nice career, or do they have most of their brains blown out from all of
Hey,
these
it's
head
like
hits?
it's like any other sport, the cream rises to the crop, and there are a lot of guys working really hard to become the best in the world that never get there, that are stepping stones for the guys that do get there. And certainly medical experts will argue back and forth on, everything from whether wearing headgear is more dangerous or less dangerous. Is MMA, less dangerous than 12 rounds of boxing because it's only, 3 rounds. Yeah. And a lot of the time is spent on the ground, not getting your head pounded. You get knocked out very quickly with the smaller gloves. So are smaller gloves actually safer? Same arguments going on right now with the bare knuckle league that is doing so well. Is bare knuckle, you get cut more, but maybe there's less brain damage because you're out so quickly, whereas boxing, you're look at that fight you were just looking at, Ali's getting pounded on by the strongest man in the world for 10 rounds and then comes out of it. So is that, which is worse and which is better? Is your brain more damaged by sustained blows or by one blow? But we're seeing the same thing in football. Look at these lawsuits against the leagues where guys have been, early onset dementia and all that from football, and certainly sports are a risk. People get hurt in skiing. Bill Johnson smashed his head through even with a helmet on and got dementia. Or who is the Formula One driver, Michael
Schumacher?
Yeah, who got in a ski accident with a helmet on and hit a
Yeah.
tree.
Who
Yeah,
would have thought?
who would have thought, right?
Yeah. I just realized we went like 15 minutes over time, but yeah, apologies for that. Just like one or two last questions. What do you think about power slapping?
I know very little about it. I've never seen one of the shows. When I heard that it was like a Dana White thing, it was like, wow, that's something bizarre. But I've never seen one. So, it seems like off the charts weird to me, but
Seemed like the
who
broest
knows what's
of
going to
bro
work?
things.
Yeah. Like I didn't think bare knuckle would work, but it's got a great following. I've been to a number of their events, and they're getting, and the events are great, by the way, and guys like Chris Camozzi, who are such handsome guys, are risking their good looks, in the bare knuckle ring now. And
Yeah.
the prize money is up. Conor McGregor was at the bare knuckle fight in Denver a couple months ago. And so everybody's looking at it as a new thing. And so I certainly like the fights and wish them all the best. And
There you go. One last question. You're on your deathbed. What will you have want to accomplish, and what legacy do you want to leave?
just that, I have happy children. I think my kids are successful, and I've got an older son who's a yacht designer in Victoria, British Columbia, and hopefully he's living his dream and his passion. And that's what you want for your life, is your legacy is your kids' success. I think like we can only eat so many great steaks. We were talking about steaks earlier, and drink so many great bottles of wine, but ultimately at the end of the day, I think you're measured by your legacy and what you've done, but then how you've done with your family.
There you go. Well, John, thank you so much for showing up today. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, the World Pro Ski Tour is worldproskitour.com or skiracing.com for ski racing media. And I don't know why anybody would need to find out about me, but we've got, cool things going on tour this year, active tour coming up and great racers coming over. And yeah, if you ever want to learn anything about ski racing, follow Ski Racing Media for sure. And, we've talked about fighting, but my day-to-day is really trying to get the Pro Tour to be the NASCAR of ski racing, with the World Cup really being the, sort of Formula One of ski racing over in Europe. Provide income producing opportunities for ski racers outside of the national team system, on the pro side. So that's my passion this week, and trying to make that happen.
There you go. Well, thank you so much. I am Charles Cormier, host of CEO Wisdom Podcast. And if you want to start, scale,